Swamin iti namini Namaste Saraswati Deve Guruvani Pracharine Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paskadya Dasatarine Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasudi Gaur Bhaktivindam Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So today we're continuing the history of Ajamila. And 6-1. And I did get some homework from Shritan Prabhu. Let me see here. I think that's it. I think I only got from Shritan. Yeah, I only got from Shritan. Let's see what Shritan wrote. He says, explain how you can understand your past, present, and future. What is the fault in creating society, friendship, and love? Why does it say that everyone must struggle alone with material nature? And what is the hope for us? Good. 3 good questions. Question 1. According to your karma, you have an idea of what type of karma one has performed. Yeah, according to your present karma, you have an idea of what type of karma one performed in the past. Based on your situation, you can understand if the actions performed in your previous life were in the category of akarma, vikarma, or karma. You understand one's situation can help one understand. By understanding one's present situation, this can help us to understand our past karma. This is stated in verse 47. Where it also says that based on one's present actions, their fate in the future will be determined. Okay, so this is a very interesting point that we learned last week. That is, at birth you don't know what your karma is, but it's almost sure that it's a mixed bag of good and bad karma. So as you get older, things happen. Accidents, and you get, you have some talent that you developed, and some good things happen, some bad things happen. Then you can understand what your past life was like, because the bad things that happen are reactions to the bad karma that you performed, and the good things that happen are the reaction to the pious karma that you performed. And if you're lucky enough to be Krishna conscious, that means that you had some agyata sukriti or some devotional service in your previous life, and thus you pick up from the point where you left. And now, in your present life, besides the good and bad karma from previous life that you're enjoying or suffering in this life, if you continue to do bad things and some good things, then you can know what's going to happen to you in the next life. So you can tell past, present, and future from the present. It's a very interesting point. It's actually a brilliant point. Okay, the second question. What is the fault in creating society, friendship, and love? It's not no fault in creating it, but the fault is enjoying it for sense gratification. And Sritan writes, creating society, friendship, and love without Krishna only causes bondage. It is described in verse 52 as a living entity trapping himself in that is similar to a living entity trapping the silkworm trapping itself in a cocoon. This is also stated in Bhagavad Gita verse 3.9, where it says, work done as a sacrifice for Vishnu has to be performed, otherwise work binds one to this material world. Very good, Sritan. And then question 3, why does it say that everyone must struggle alone with material nature, and what is the hope for us? So question 3, the living entity's condition is described to be pitiful. He has trapped himself in the material world, conditioned by the 3 modes of material nature. He gets more and more desires and becomes forever entangled in the vines or in the grip of the material world. He goes through repeated birth and death. And you stop there with an and. Anyway, very good, Sritan. Hare Krishna. Thank you for your homework. Okay, so now we'll continue. 6th Canto, Chapter 1, Text 53. The foolish, embodied living entity, inept at controlling his senses and mind, is forced to act according to the influence of the modes of material nature, against his desires. He is like a silkworm trapped in it with no possibility of getting out. The living entity traps himself in a network of his own fruitive activities and then can find no way to release himself. Thus he is always bewildered and repeatedly he dies. And now the purport, Prabhupada says, as already explained, the influence of the modes of nature is very strong. The living entity entangled in different types of fruitive activity is like a silkworm trapped in a cocoon. Getting free is very difficult unless he is helped by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Well, this is very similar to a verse in the Bhagavad Gita that says, let me find the verse. It says, Yechaiva satvika bhava rajasas tamasas chaye mata evetitan vidi natvaham te sutemayi. This is the 7th chapter, 12th verse, and it says, know that all states of being, be they of goodness, passion, or ignorance, are manifested by my energy. I am in one sense everything, but I am independent. I am not under the modes of material nature, for they, on the contrary, are within me. So here Krishna is saying he's, although he created the modes of material nature, he's completely transcendental. He's not affected by them at all. On the other hand, the next verse says, Tribir gunamayir bhavir evi sarvamidam jagat. Mohitam nabijananti mam ebya param avyayam. So this is the 7th chapter, 13th verse. And it says, deluded by the 3 modes, goodness, passion, and ignorance, the whole world does not know me, who am above the modes and inexhaustible. So this is very similar to 6.1.52, where it says, we just read, the foolish embodied living entity, inept at controlling his senses and mind. Inept is a good word, I-N-E-P-T. It means that They're basically a failure. They're not capable of controlling their mind and senses. So the foolish embodied living entity, inept at controlling his senses mind, is forced to act according to the influence of the modes of material nature against his desires. So you see, when we come under the control of the modes of material nature, it's goodness, passion, and ignorance, they're so powerful that they can force us to do things that are counterproductive for us, but yet we still do them. By the influence, especially of passion and ignorance. So passion causes lust, and extreme passion causes greed, and ignorance causes misery, suffering. Lust also will cause suffering because, it causes frustration and greed and bewilderment, and then ignorance causes misery, suffering, and total defeat. Okay. So then this verse 7:13, it says, deluded by the three modes, goodness, passion, ignorance, the whole world does not know me, who am above the modes and inexhaustible. So in the purport, Prabhupada writes, the whole world is enchanted by three modes of material nature. Those who are bewildered by these three modes, which includes the mode of goodness, it's also bewildering in many ways, cannot understand that transcendental to this material nature is the Supreme Lord, Krishna. Every living entity under the influence of material nature has a particular type of body and a particular type of psychological and biological activities accordingly. There are four classes of men functioning in the three material modes of nature. Those who are purely in the mode of goodness are called brahmanas. Those who are purely in the mode of passion are called kshatriyas. Those who are in the modes of both passion and ignorance are called vaishyas. Those who are completely in ignorance are called sudras. And those who are less than that are animals or animal life. However, these designations are not permanent. So that's the good news. I may either be a brahmana, kshatriya, vaishya, or whatever. In any case, this life is temporary. But although life is temporary and we do not know what we are going to be in the next life, by the spell of this illusory energy, we consider ourselves in terms of this bodily conception of life, and we thus think that we are American, Indian, Russian, or Brahmana, Hindu, Muslim, etc. And if we become entangled with the modes of material nature, then we forget the Supreme Personality of Godhead who is behind all these modes. So Lord Krishna says that living entities deluded by these three modes of nature do not understand that behind the material background is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. There are many different kinds of living entities, human beings, demigods, animals, etc. And each and every one of them is under the influence of the material nature, and all of them have forgotten the transcendent personality of Godhead. Those who are in the modes of passion and ignorance, and even those who are in the mode of goodness, cannot go beyond the impersonal Brahman conception of the absolute truth. They are bewildered before the Supreme Lord in his present personal feature, which possesses all beauty, opulence, knowledge, strength, fame, and renunciation. When even those who are in goodness cannot understand, what hope is there for those in passion and ignorance? Krishna consciousness is transcendental to all these three modes of material nature, and those who are truly established in Krishna consciousness are actually liberated. That's a very wonderful purport by Prabhupada. Okay, so then, text 53. Not a single living entity can remain unchanged even for a moment. Not a single living entity can remain unengaged even for a moment. One must act by his natural tendency according to the three modes of material nature, because this natural tendency forcibly makes him work in a particular way. okay, everybody has a natural tendency. Now, if we work according to our natural tendency, but offer the result to Krishna, we can become gradually liberated from the modes of material nature. But if we just work according to our natural tendency without any, let's say, reference to Krishna, without offering anything to Krishna, then we become more entangled. And this is related to the verse, 3rd chapter in Bhagavad Gita, Nahi Kaschit Sanam Api, let's see. 3rd chapter, 5th verse, Nahi Kaschit Sanam Api, Jatu Tistati Karma Krit Karyate Hi Avasa Karma Sarva Prakriti Jayagunai. And Prabhupada, and then the translation of the verse is, everyone is forced to act helplessly according to the qualities he has acquired from the modes of material nature. Therefore, no one can refrain from doing something, not even for a moment. So then Prabhupada in the purport makes some very interesting points. He says, it is not a question of embodied life, but it is the nature of the soul to be always active. So besides the influence and modes of material nature that force us to act, it's the nature of the soul that we must be active. Without the presence of the spirit soul, the material body cannot move. The body is only a dead vehicle to be worked by the spirit soul, which is always active and cannot stop even for a moment. As such, the spirit soul has to be engaged in the good work of Krishna consciousness. Otherwise, it will be engaged in occupations dictated by illusory energy. In contact with material nature, the spirit soul acquires material modes, and to purify the soul from such affinities, it is necessary to engage in the prescribed duties enjoined in the Shastras. But if the soul is engaged in his natural function of Krishna consciousness, whatever he is able to do is good for him. Okay, so everybody has a natural tendency to do work. If we learn how to offer the result of that work to Krishna, we can become free of the influence of the modes of material nature over time. If we don't have the training of Krishna consciousness, then whatever we do will just entangle us more in the cycle of birth and death. So then the purport to verse 6.153 follows. The swabhavika, or one's natural tendency, is the most important factor in action. One's natural tendency is to serve, because the living entity is an eternal servant of God. Yeah, in other words, if you don't serve Krishna, then you'll serve Maya. But you'll serve, because that's the natural tendency that we have as a spirit soul. We originally were servants of Krishna. And we come into this world and we end up serving so many other things. It can be family, it can be society, it can be nation, it could be an employer, it can be some political group, it can be so many things that we serve, but we're always going to be serving someone or something. If we don't have anybody to serve, we get a dog or a cat, and we serve the dog or the cat. But we're always going to be a servant in one way or other, because that's their natural position. The living entity wants to serve, but because of his forgetfulness of his relationship with the Supreme Lord, he serves under the modes of material nature and manufactures various modes of service, such as socialism, humanitarianism, and altruism, and Black Lives Matter, or white, or all lives matter, or no lives matter, and all these different goals. However, one should be enlightened in the tenets of the Bhagavad Gita, in other words, the knowledge of Bhagavad Gita, and accept the instruction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead that one give up all natural tendencies for material service under different names and takes to the service of the Lord. One's original natural tendency is to act in Krishna consciousness, because one's real nature is spiritual. The duty of a human being is to understand that since he is essentially spirit, he must abide by spiritual tendency and not be carried away by material tendencies. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur has therefore sung Miche Mayaravase Yat Shabese Chacha Habudubu Bai. My dear brothers, you are being carried away by the waves of material energy and are suffering in many miserable conditions. Sometimes you are drowning in the waves of material nature, and sometimes you are tossed like a swimmer struggling in the ocean. End of quote. As confirmed by Bhaktivinoda Thakur, this tendency to be battered by the waves of Maya can be changed to one's original natural tendency, which is spiritual, when the living entity comes to understand that he is eternally Krishna Dasa, a servant of God, Krishna. And then another verse from a song by Bhaktivinoda Thakur. He says, Jiva Krishna Dasa Eviswasa Karlita Araduka Nai. If instead of serving Maya under different names, one turns his service attitude toward the Supreme Lord, he is then safe, and there is no more difficulty. If one returns to his original natural tendency in the human form of life, by understanding the perfect knowledge given by Krishna himself in Vedic literature, one's life is successful. So there you are. If you want to be a success in this life and not take birth again as a dog, cat, whatever, you should take the Krishna consciousness. Otherwise, by avoiding Krishna consciousness, you're tossed around by the waves of Maya, and you'll be forced to take birth again, start all over. Who knows? Maybe in a human body, maybe in an animal body, maybe in an insect body. You don't know. It depends on your karma. So better in this life, when you have a chance to understand who you actually are, you're the eternal servant of Krishna, you take up Krishna consciousness and avoid all the downside of material life, of being tossed back and forth. And instead of serving Krishna, you're serving Maya and becoming more and more entangled in the cycle of birth and death. Text 54. The fruit of activities a living being performs, whether pious or impious, are the unseen cause for the fulfillment of his desires. This unseen cause is the root for the living entity's different bodies. Because of his intense desire, the living entity takes birth in a particular family and receives a body which is either like that of his mother or like that of his father. The gross and subtle bodies are created according to his desire. The gross body, purport, the gross body is a product of the subtle body. As stated in Bhagavad Gita 8.6, Yam yam vapi smaran bhavan tijat ante klevaram tam tam ivaiti konteya sadatad bhava bhavitaha. Whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, that state he will attain without fail. The atmosphere of the subtle body at the time of death is created by the activities of the gross body. Thus, the gross body acts during one's lifetime, and the subtle body acts at the time of death. The subtle body, which is called linga, the body of desire, is the background for the development of a particular type of gross body, which is either like that of one's mother or like that of one's father. According to the Rig Veda, if at the time of sex the secretions of the mother are more profuse than those of the father, the child will receive a female body. And if the secretions of the father are more profuse than those of the mother, the child will receive a male body. These are the subtle laws of nature which act according to the desire of the living entity. If a human being is taught to change his subtle body by developing a consciousness of Krishna, at the time of death, the subtle body will create a gross body in which he will be a devotee of Krishna. Or if he is still more perfect, he will not take another material body, but will immediately get a spiritual body and thus return home back to Godhead. This is the process of transmigration of the soul. Therefore, instead of trying to unite human societies through pacts of sense gratification that can never be achieved, it is clearly desirable to teach people how to become Krishna conscious and return home back to Godhead. This is true now and indeed at any time. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So here is a very important purport. This explains what's really going on in our life. Before we were born, when we were born, and during our entire lifetime, and again at the moment of death, what's going on. So we should carefully study this purport. It should be very carefully studied, because it is a revelation of what actually happens to us before birth, or at the moment of death in our previous life, and in our present birth, throughout our life, and again at the moment of death in the present life. So, and this is very similar to many things that Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita. So he quotes the verse, Yam Yam Vapi Smaran Bhavan, that is the 8th chapter, verse number 6. So whatever we think of at the moment of death, whatever desires we have at the moment of death, that's what we're going to become in the next life. So the moment of death is a defining moment for our next life. And this is explained also in Ishopanishad, where in the mantra 17, the devotee prays to the Lord to remember his activities and the sacrifices he has performed before his material body is turned to ashes. He makes this prayer at the time of death. So it's the 17th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, 17th mantra of the Bhagavad Gita, which says, Om, let's see what's here. Vair anilam amritam atedam basmantam saridam om kratos smara kritam smara kratos smara kritam smara. Let this temporary body be burnt to ashes, and let the air of life be merged with the totality of air. This is a mantra you should say, besides Hare Krishna mantra, at the moment of death. O my Lord, please now, O my Lord, please remember all my sacrifices. And because you are the ultimate beneficiary, please remember all that I have done for you. So then it says, he makes this prayer at the time of death, with full consciousness of his past deeds and of the ultimate goal. Well, the ultimate goal is Krishna. And full consciousness of his past deeds, well, hopefully, most of his deeds should have been Krishna conscious, offering so many different things to Krishna. One who is completely under the rule of material nature, however, so now this is, what we just read was about the devotee, now this is about the karmi. One who is completely under the rule of material nature remembers the heinous, H-E-I-N-O-U-S. Heinous means horrible, sinful, mean. So one who is completely under the rule of material nature remembers the heinous activities he performed during the existence of his material body, and consequently, he gets another material body after death. The Bhagavad Gita 8.6 confirms this truth. Yam yam vapi smaran bhavan tijat ante kalevaram tam tamivaiti konteya sadatad bhava bhavitaha. Whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, O son of Kunti, that state he will attain without fail. Thus the mind carries the living entity's propensities into the next life. So therefore, cultivation of Krishna consciousness through physical acts of devotional service and mental acts of desiring to serve Krishna, and intellectual acts of discerning what is pure and what is not pure service. This is important to learn how to do this and practice doing this throughout our entire life, so that at the moment of death we can easily remember Krishna and go back to Godhead. Then Prabhupada continues, unlike the simple animals who have no developed mind, the dying human being can remember the activities of his life like dreams at night. Therefore, his mind remains surcharged with material desires, and consequently, he cannot enter into the spiritual kingdom with a spiritual body. The devotees, however, develop a sense of love for Godhead by practicing devotional service to the Lord, even if at the time of death a devotee does not remember his service to the Lord does not forget him and service of his devotee. This prayer is given to remind the Lord of the devotee's sacrifices, but even if there is no such reminder, the Lord does not forget the service rendered by his pure devotee. So, it's very important to become a pure devotee of the Lord in this life if you don't want to repeat birth and death. So what happens at the moment of death? We can remember the activities of our life, like dreams at night. It appears in front of us. And in a very short period of time, like in a few seconds, or our whole life sort of appears before us, at least the good and bad things, and hopefully mostly good. And then that's the last impression we have. And based on the quality of those impressions, we either go back to Godhead, or we get another body as a devotee, or we get the body of a demon, or we get the body of an animal or lower. So it's very important that we cultivate Krishna consciousness. And therefore we are preparing ourselves for the most important moment in our life. That's the moment of death, when we can successfully remember Krishna and go back to Godhead, or not remember Krishna and become a victim of the material nature, of the modes of material nature. So there's another verse, Srimad Bhagvatam. Let me see if I can find it. Srimad Bhagvatam, 11th canto, chapter 29, verse 34. Let's see what that says. Well, let's see. Oh. And it says, it's 11.29.34. A person who gives up all fruitive activities and offers himself entirely unto me, eagerly desiring to render service unto me, achieves liberation from birth and death, and is promoted to the status of sharing my own opulences. Well, that's a very nice verse. And let's see what the next verse says. No, okay, wait a minute. Let's see what the previous verse says. Yeah, so basically, let me read that verse again. 11:29:34. A person who gives up all fruitive activities, all selfish activities for sense gratification, and offers himself entirely unto me, eagerly desiring to render service unto me, achieves liberation from birth and death, and is promoted to the status of sharing my own opulences. So what are Krishna's opulences? Beauty, knowledge, power, riches, fame, and renunciation. Those are some of his opulences, and we can share them with Krishna. Okay, so at the moment of death, everything we did in our life, most everything we did in our life, is going to appear to us in a very short period of time like a movie or like a dream. And hopefully if most of the things we did, or all the things we did, were good, and based on serving Krishna, we go back to Godhead. And if they're not, and a lot of things are bad, and a lot of sense gratification and so forth, then we stay in this material world, and we could even go down into the animal, insect, bird world based on how much sinful activity we've committed. Okay, so that's an important verse. So then verse 55 says, since the living entity is associated with material nature, he is in an awkward position. But if in the human form of life he is taught how to associate with the Supreme Personality of Godhead or his devotee, this position can be overcome. So since the living entity is associated with material nature, he is in an awkward position. Yeah, because we're going to be influenced by the modes of material nature. But if in the human form of life he is taught how to associate with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that means how to be Krishna conscious, because that means we're associating with Krishna all the time, or his devotee, this meaning the pure devotees, this position can be overcome. In other words, we can overcome the influence of material nature. That's what it's saying. And the purport says the word Prakriti means material nature, and Purusha may also refer to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. If one wants to continue his association with Prakriti, the female energy of Krishna, and be separated from Krishna by the illusion that he is able to enjoy Prakriti, he must continue in his conditional life. If he changes his consciousness, however, and associates with the Supreme Original Person, Purusham Sasvatam, or with his associates, he can get out of the entanglement of material nature. As confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 4.9, Janma Karma Chame Divyam Evam Yo Veti Tattvata. One must simply understand the Supreme Person, Krishna, in terms of his form, name, activities, and pastimes. This will keep one always in the association of Krishna. Tyakvadeham punarajanma naiti ma'ameti Arjuna. Thus, after giving up his gross material body, one accepts another gross body, but a spiritual body. One accepts not another gross body, but a spiritual body in which to return home back to Godhead. Thus, one ends the tribulation, meaning the troubles, caused by his association with the material energy. In summary, the living entity is an eternal servant of God, but he comes to the material world and is bound by material conditions because of his desire to lord it over matter. Liberation means giving up this false consciousness and reviving one's original service to the Lord. This return to one's original life is called mukti, as confirmed in Srimad Bhagvatam, muktir hitvanyata rupam swarupena vyavastati. This is a very beautiful purport. That's Canto 6, Chapter 1, verse 55. And we'll end with the next verse, which are two verses, and 56 and 57. It says, in the beginning, this Brahmana named Ajamila studied all the Vedic literatures. He was a reservoir of good character, good conduct, and good qualities, firmly established in executing all the Vedic injunctions. He was very mild and gentle, and he kept his mind and senses under control. Furthermore, he was always truthful. He knew how to chant the Vedic mantras, and he was also very pure. Ajamila was very respectful to his spiritual master, the fire god, meaning Agni, guests, and the elderly members of his household. Indeed, he was free from false prestige. He was upright, benevolent to all living entities, meaning kind to all living entities, and well-behaved. He would never speak nonsense or envy anyone. Wow. So he was really an exceptional young boy, up to the age of about 16. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The order carriers of Yamaraja, the Yamadutas, are explaining the factual position of piety and impiety, and how a living entity is entangled in this material world. Describing the history of Ajamila's life, the Yamadutas relate that in the beginning he was a learned scholar of the Vedic literature. He was well-behaved, neat and clean, and very kind to everyone. In fact, he had all good qualities. In other words, he was like a perfect Brahmana. A Brahmana is expected to be perfectly pious, to follow all the regulative principles, and to have all good qualities. The symptoms of piety are explained in these verses. Srila Viraraghava Acharya comments that Dritavrata means Dritam Vratam Sri Sangha Rahit Yatmaka Brahmacharya Rupam. In other words, Ajamila followed the rules and regulations of celibacy as a perfect brahmachari and was very soft-hearted, truthful, clean, and pure. How he fell down in spite of all these qualities and thus came to be threatened with punishment by Yamaraj will be described in the following verses. Okay, so your homework for tomorrow is explain what happens at the moment of death. And also, that's question 1. Question 2. So, explain what causes the living entity to take another birth. And for that, you would have to read 6.1.54. Why is he taking another birth? And question 3, how can a living entity get on the path of auspiciousness and not take another birth in a material body? Okay, 3 questions. Question 1, what happens at the moment of death? Question 2, how is one entangled in this lifetime? And why one becomes entangled. And number 3, how can one be liberated from the cycle of birth and death? Thank you very much. Any questions? No questions, okay. All glories to Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.